Hi, Daryl Combs here. Are you on Wikisana?
Dear viewers, welcome to today's Visite format. Again in the usual form. And at this point I would like to thank you very much for your contributions. It always touches me how much this show can live, how much you fill it with all your questions. But it also touches me how deeply you sometimes go and how painful a lot of things can be for me. And I am grateful, perhaps also for one or the other, to be able to discuss this here, of course anonymously, within the framework of this Visite program. Thank you very, very much for that. Simone is writing to me today. Simone is from Germany, and Simone describes or writes that she would have liked to know what is happening now in this time. We have autumn. We are heading towards a very light, poor season, which is much cooler here. And she would like to know which laboratory values would be important in advance to stabilize or support the body here, perhaps also very deliberately and consciously over these months. I would very, very much like to answer that. That is not a problem at all. I would just like to ask you very, very kindly not to overestimate supplements in their application. The prerequisite that we provide our organism with high-quality supplies is, of course, very much dependent on what we provide it with. And the most valuable alternative to all of this, of course, is food. I emphasize food and not just say something to eat. In other words, within the framework of corresponding laboratory parameters, it is the food that is actually valuable to us if it is high quality. And with that, of course, nature always has the corresponding cocktail ready, which of course can also be produced through the energy that we provide ourselves with, and this is about nutrition, wants to be supplied far better by food. One apple a day, no doc tortures you. It's not about the mass of vitamin C, but it's about the quality. And there is an apple in the organic store that is really more honest than 1 kilo, where the apple is sprayed 20 times. Please do not underestimate that either in the supply. Especially in these months, pay attention to it. Now is the time of the oranges, i.e. the orange grapefruits. It is very easy to squeeze out 1 or 2 grapefruits with the juicer in the morning. You can also make an orange juice, but you can also eat the oranges. These are including lemons, valuable sources of vitamin C. The body is not now dependent on a huge amount, but it needs it in addition, because vitamin C, of course, is an incredibly high antioxidant and thus reduces the so-called radical stress. When we talk about prevention, even in winter, then another note, keep the body temperature. If the body temperature drops, then the immunity cannot be available to you in its full strength. That means that at 1 degree, at least 30% of the immune system is regulated down. That means, of course, if there's too little body temperature, the body adjusts very much to a lower activity. This is a question of metabolism and the immune economy. So if you only go to winter without a head covering, then 70% of body heat is lost. Now, of course, we are all leaving the house, the parking lot is in front of the door, and then I go to the office and take the elevator right away. So actually my life is less well spent in this cold and warm, but the body would benefit from it if I moved consciously every day for 20, 30, 40 minutes. I can get off at the tram one station earlier or get on later in the morning. It's a question of organization. How do you do that? But these would be health-conserving measures that the body takes with great gratitude. Young girls, I would say, take care of the warmth, especially in your stomach, especially in your kidney area. Cold feet lead to malnutrition, especially in the small pelvis. And don't be surprised if the bladder shows up again in some way. It would be valuable to support the body in this regard in winter. Now it's time for the sauna again. Now is also a time when we might like to take a full bath once or twice a week. It can be really rising in temperature as you tolerate it because, of course, essential processes in the heat development of the immune system are cranked up. And the body, our immune system works at night, has an incredibly good chance of supporting the body again and again. And the immune competence plays out at night. Therefore, another important tip in this winter. It gets dark earlier. That means sometimes we are also pushed a little bit in the winter. Sleep well, 7 if possible, 8 hours of sleep. You can't appreciate high enough what the body does for you at night. It has to redefine itself every day. It has to keep a homeostasis for you every day. It is called homeostasis when all processes in themselves are allowed to remain in a great balance. But of course, let alone a big fight or a big illness or injury or a very unpleasant situation that you have experienced, exhausting. Exhausting in the sense that the body, which is under stress, is now more susceptible. Pay attention to when you get a flu. Some people always think that an injection prevents the flu. I have to deny that quite clearly. Pay attention to when you become susceptible. And you won't become susceptible if you stay in your center, if you stay in your peace. That means whenever you have to deal with a strain, the body can do that. There are hundreds of thousands of immune processes in front of it, so you can't just do that. There's a strain now and tomorrow I'll be sick too. No, I'm not. That means, for example, that children who, in the context of their possibilities, that they come into contact with a lot of viruses and bacteria, thus build their immunity. Often in silence, they call it. That means they build up antibodies and are not sick. But often the body needs this state of being sick to build up antibodies. So I don't want to deny that in any way. But such things are very important right now in the winter months. and what you can and may have to investigate in a laboratory technical way and can or have to substitute. I'd like to get to that now, Simone, so that I can answer your question accordingly. What I find again and again, there's a lot that's been said. Especially QS24 TV is the channel that has made it clear through Professor Spitz and many corypheras here that we have to take care of our vitamin D levels twice a year. And I'm still really shocked in everyday life with what little doses people think they get well over this winter. And I'm shocked at the assessment of such a vitamin D metabolism. Because if we know that vitamin D is not one of the most important vitamins in life, because it's not at all, it's a hormone like testosterone and estrogen, then we have to say that it can only become really active when it's free. And if we measure 25-OH, then it's a bound and a free combinating. That means the bound is 95% and the free is only 5%. And the receptor where vitamin D has to dock, it's not the receptor membrane of the cell. That's the way it is with everyone else. It's intracellular. That means it has to go into the cell, and what's bound stays out there. That's why it's so important to measure a biologically active form. Because if you measure both the inactive, the bound, but also, for example, the active, but not the free, then you don't have a good statement. And vitamin D, of course, belongs to the family of steroids. It is a very important transcription factor also within the framework of DNA reduplication, i.e. the reading. And we know today that over 100,000 immune processes depend on it. I always find the example so beautiful. That's the key I have, and get into every apartment when I'm a homeowner. And there are 1,000 apartments in the skyscraper. Then it's vitamin D that decides how far each individual apartment is accessible, intact, and so on. That means today, in 2023, we are facing a great opportunity to learn a lot about this hormone. But maybe a lot of it, and perhaps only 50% of its immense significance. And it will take years before the last doctor really appreciates it. And we should ask all departments, especially at this time, no matter where I am as a patient, at the gynecologist, at the orthopedist, at the neurologist, or at the GP, do you know your current vitamin D level? And then please measure the free one. This type of measurement is crucial. And then, of course, the necessity of substitution. I have to be honest with you. No matter how the level is, I always aim for it in the highest reference area of the laboratory. And almost no one goes below 5,000 in the winter. But then he has to be highly substituted or have created high reserves in the summer. And that is actually not really possible with our latitude in this form. Especially since we are not in the light for 8 hours, of course. And especially since the exposure times are too short. And also the area of what can be enjoyed at all to really activate vitamin D in the body. The most important hormone in life, high vitamin D level. And to get a virus disease so easily is difficult. I can now say from experience. I've been at it for 30 years. And even if the disease is there, you have to make sure that now everything can run at high speed. And finally, we know 30% today. Maybe the number is already higher. We wouldn't have any tumor diseases because vitamin D clearly stimulates the natural killer cells, which are important for tumor defense. So let your free vitamin D be measured. Per milliliter, it has a value of 8.6 to about 28. So all the values below that mean, please be sufficiently substituted. That would be vitamin D. That's the most important thing. And the other thing is, of course, that you also have to make sure that the body, within its unlimited homeostasis, i.e. unlimited mobility, can supply the organism without friction. If it has sufficient minerals and trace elements. And maybe it's not necessarily important to measure all of them now. But I keep seeing zinc. I just see that zinc is too low. But zinc is a multi-talent of the cell and hundreds of enzymes. Enzymes are active ingredients that bring the reaction from A to B, are supplied by zinc. That means this zinc intracellular, 70% are in the cell, are important. In the serum outside, in the blood, in the liquid part of the blood, only 1 to 2%, 85% are, for example, contained in the red blood cells. That means if I have white spots on my fingernails, if I'm somehow unsatisfied with my hair, go out a bit, they turn gray faster somewhere. If I have oral thrush, fatigue, concentration disorders, so on the mouth, sometimes periorally around the mouth, a certain redness. Again and again, nerve tension, blood, or that I develop a form of anemia. So that the hemoglobin is now getting lower. That I have wounds on my body that somehow heal so badly. Then that's a clear indication that zinc is underprivileged. But if you don't have any problems in that direction, I would still measure it intracellularly. And at that moment, of course, not only intake enough dark leafy vegetables, but also if you substitute, then I have to tell you 10% are only absorbed by the intestine. That means 15 milligrams is quite a bit low. Zinc cannot be stored in the body either. That is why the body is dependent on it also in the context of substitution, not to take 30 or 60 milligrams at a time, but to distribute it over the day. Please, here, of course, according to the laboratory analysis. If you balance that out in terms of nutrition, of course, then you don't necessarily have to take these things in now. Unless if you are in a very tense, but also situations that require more detoxification from the body, more immunity, then support can be quite good. There are also many preparations, zinc and vitamin C, especially in winter now together. Then I always find it important to also look at ferritin. You all know about the great importance of iron, whereby iron, of course, can also have a high sensitivity. Iron is, of course, bound in the body to hemoglobin. Hemoglobin then creates the red dye because the iron then oxidizes in connection with oxygen. But people, for example, who live vegetarian, of course, do not absorb that much B12, or have too low iron and thus too low storage iron. At the moment, of course, they do not have the opportunity to store enough oxygen or transport it. And that is, of course, counterproductive, especially at this time. The body must be able to rely on support here as part of its own fitness. Sometimes it is also good to determine the ferritin level because increased ferritin levels are also very, very negative. And especially when we talk about bronze diabetes, when the skin gets a little dark. Even with diabetes, when joint pain occurs, then you should always think about measuring the ferritin level. We have already made several broadcasts about hemochromatosis, so this is an iron storage disease. But in the context of a prophylactic check now, I would still recommend it. And then, of course, also gently, not as an iron infusion, add it regularly. B12, vitamin B12, I'll come back to the deficiency a little bit. Please do not measure in the blood. This is a very unstable value, which also sometimes allows a misinterpretation because it has a very large reference range. And this reference range is often at least from about 80 to, or not 80, 300 to 1700. And people who then move at 500, 600 think that's good, great. And that's all a bit of a fallacy. B12 is needed for intracellular, for detoxification, for nerve metabolism. And the contact partner is the cell. That means if I measure B12 in the blood now, I will not have the guarantee that the cell, and we have 700 trillions of them, really gets enough. Therefore, please let the methylmalonic acid be measured in the urine. Methylmalonic acid is a product in metabolism that gives us clues, possibly also to disrupted energy metabolism. B12 also contains a lot of cobalt, of course. It is used a lot when the cell, due to various causes, has to respond to an increased carbon monoxide reaction. Or nitrogen monoxide, sorry. And this so-called nitrosative stress then leads to a high consumption of nitrogen monoxide, which has an impact on cellular energy output. For me, it is important that you either, if you say for ethical reasons B12 in the form of meat is out of the question for me. I don't want to go that far to teach you, but then provide for a good substitution. Also pay attention to it in connection with B6 and folic acid, and maybe measure the homocysteine again. Then this is also a good parameter which perhaps also reveals a B6 or folic acid deficiency. But I would say all the B12 bonded things, what you measure in the blood, carrier proteins, or the haptocorin, which are not biologically active, that does not come into play when you measure it in the blood. How much is actually left of the cell? Because this biological activity is only 20% in the measured B12 blood. And there is a low value to be counted twice as low. Therefore, again, the methylmalonic acid, less than 1.6 milligram per creatinine, are measured. And I often see very high values, which then draw conclusions that the B12 is completely undernourished intracellularly. Many older people have a B12 deficiency. It should be an absolute law that older people are examined for vitamin B12 deficiencies via this urine measurement. I would be happy if it is an investigation, which also the health insurances pay for the people, because many of them have negligible brain performance, physical weakness, energetic limitations, detoxification, capacitive limitations, which then often provoke this very degrading person. I can speak from experience. I used to take care of the nursing homes a lot, but that was a must for me. And I felt that mine were so involved, they were so active, they were allowed to take part in life. And many just sat there, maybe even sedated at the table without participation. And there are so many drugs that block this metabolism, such as diabetes drugs with Formin or Pantozol, all the stomach pacifiers, and so on. So that would be an important aspect in addition. Then it is always good to have a look at the hemogram. Now it is like this. We also do dark field microscopy examinations. Of course, you also see certain activity in the blood. You don't have that on a large differential hemogram, of course. But it is important that you do not overlook an anemia, which can then, of course, be due to B12 deficiency or ferritin restriction. Hemoglobin is, of course, important because it binds to the oxygen. The erythrocytes that we then capture, we then know how many we have sufficiently. The leukocytes are important, the white blood cells for the defense. In the dark field, we see more. In the dark field, we don't see the number directly, but we see whether white blood cells are strong enough in their activity for this winter. And I was allowed to produce the video at the 5G Congress a few years ago in how far mobile load due to our e-smoke problem also reduces the activity of the white blood cells. And that's why they really create a free and good place to sleep. And no Wi-Fi at night, and especially not the cell phone. You can wish yourself a nice alarm clock at Christmas and can put the cell phone away in a metal box. That would be valuable for all those who want to know how it works. Yes, these are the things that are close to my heart to tell you in that direction. And I believe that you, just like me, come through the winter without anything that itches and stings. I have to tell you, our body itself has the best immune system. It has been grinding for centuries, or maybe for thousands of years, everything that our body is able to do. It's not at all necessary to call up everything today. In addition, we say today that only a fraction of our brain power is present. So up there is so much air, there are so many possibilities up there. Don't just see things on the outside, but create a peaceful winter for yourself. As good as you can. Don't let yourself get out of your comfort zone. And above all, don't get into a spiral of worry and fear. We have so much infinite in our own hands. I always like this time of silence, of peace, of candles. Yes, maybe play together in the evening. Open traditions, meet regularly. Especially in this winter time, we all need each other. It's not so nice to invest in these contacts. It's not as nice to have friendships to maintain. And maybe to have found other friends, with whom you go into a resonance that you didn't even know before, but with whom you feel connected. Especially at this time, it is incredibly important. And I sincerely hope that you, Simone, will get through the winter uncomplicatedly. And if then her body is still able to produce a good fever. Because everything that is above 38.5 degrees, it leverages everything carefree. Then you may have to tie your leg for 2 to 3 days. But that would be a valuable, beautiful, good process. And people who say they had an infection and had a fever, those I tap or slap on the shoulder. And I'm happy when you tell me about it. Because it shows, after all, that you are on it. It is also very important to steady the body again and again. To grind it and to make it strong. For possible situations. And believe me, there are 100,000 situations a day that he does for you that you don't even notice. And then there is the moment when he may not succeed. Also a moment that is explainable. For me personally, I always know exactly where I have to pay attention now. Or what could I have provoked now? Because I lost my balance of life a bit. In this sense, life is pretty much unconditional. In the context of great justice to yourself. We humans are sometimes evil and a little against our body. We don't want that now, and it doesn't fit now either. But it fits the body, and he has the last word. And then he gets the rest and the time he needs now. Because he may have been directed elsewhere in the past. In this sense, I wish you a wonderful week this autumn. Maybe you like to walk through the park and rush through the leaves with the rubber boots. I like this feeling so much. Or just let the kites rise with the grandchildren. Whatever. I remember a situation. We had a great idea, went to the North Sea with our little children, and thought we are the only ones who can let the kites rise. And 500 people had this idea, and that was an unforgettable experience for me. I look forward to your entries at Visite@QS24.TV. And I look forward to welcoming you again next week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.